In this video, we will cover connecting to target replication sites. Target replication sites are of two types. One is the vCenter vSphere replication server site, as well as cloud sites. So we have the ability to replicate out to the cloud. An example of that is vCloud Air Disaster Recovery. So we are back again at the VMware vSphere web client. We're in the vCenter inventory lists, and we have two vCenters here. One is the 220 vCenter, which is our primary vCenter, and we have the 221 vCenter, which is at our branch site number 2. These are working in linked mode. The 220 vCenter is actually running the platform services controller embedded, and when I installed vCenter server on 221, I only installed vCenter server, not the platform services controller. The platform services controller that's embedded in 220 at the home site at headquarters is actually serving the SSO domain called site.local. You can see it here, site.local. So site.local is SSO domain for the platform services controller that's embedded in 220. vCenter server 221 is running in linked mode. It does not have its own dedicated platform services controller. It is connected to the same platform services controller that's embedded in 220, and that's why they're working here in linked mode. And it also is being served from there as site.local. Now, why did we go into this? It's because you will see when we look at the target sites, you will see that from one perspective, the target site is looked upon as local, which means basically being in the same domain, and versus being external, which would be in a different domain. And it's kind of interesting the way it all turns out. Now, moving forward to targets. So what we see at this point in time is I'm looking at 221. So this is our branch site, site number 2 branch site. And when I look at related objects in virtual machines, I see I'm running that vCenter there. We installed the replication appliance and we installed the replication server. Now, when I look at summary, I see that vSphere replication is up and running. However, there are no target sites for this vCenter server, and that is because we have not set up any. When I look at 220, our headquarters, you will see that that actually is connected to a target site, which is our branch 3, which has the vCenter 223. Back to 221. See what it looks like. No incoming replications, no outgoing replications. We look at manage. There are no target sites. So we're at the branch 2, and let us now add a target site, not a cloud provider target site, but a target site that's vCenter based within our own environment. I click on that, and it's interesting. Connect to local site, and it already tells me that there is a vCenter server that it has to connect to, and it knows it's not connected to anything. So 220 is the one that actually comes up. And what I want to do is basically say OK, and it is going to go through its motions. After a minute or so, when we come back, we see that a new target site has been added. So for this branch office site 221, it is now linked to and connected to, the status is connected. It's linked to the main vCenter or a headquarters vCenter 220, and it's connected to the vSphere replication appliance that's running out there at that same address 70. Now note that in this case, I did not have to provide any credentials. So when I added the site, it knew where it was and basically just went ahead and added it. And the reason why I did not have to provide any credentials is because we are working here in linked mode and we are sharing the same platform services controller. So it's single sign-on all the way. Now let us go to our headquarters site and see what the situation looks like from there. I click on the headquarters site, and now I see that the target sites have changed. The target, initially we only had the branch 3 target site, and now we see that we have the branch 2 target site as well at the address of 75, which is the main vSphere replication appliance address. So the headquarters site is now connected to our two branches. Branch 3 at 223 with an appliance address of 71, and branch 2 at address 221 with a replication appliance address of 75. Now let's go over to the other side and to the branches and see whether we can configure replication among them. Now, of course, one would not do that in real life because in all probability, you will either be replicating from a branch to headquarters or from a branch to a disaster recovery site, right? I mean, those are the only two likely options. You're unlikely to be replicating from branch to branch. Anyways, we can take a look at replicating from branch to branch by seeing if we can connect 221 and 223 together for replication. So I go to my branch 2 and the only target right now is headquarters. I click on connect to a remote site because there are no other local sites to connect to. The platform services controller address for branch 3 is 192.168.0.223. It is running with an embedded platform services controller. Administrator at site 3 in its own SSO domain. After logging in, it tells us what vCenter server is available with that platform services controller. And this is the embedded platform services controller for this vCenter as we know, and we click OK. And it's going to go through its configurations. And it comes back after a minute or so, and now we have a second target that is available. So branch 2 is now connected also to branch 3. And of course, as you know, that's the address of the replication appliance there. Now let's go to branch 3 and see what it looks like from there. This is branch 3. We look at the target sites. It's interesting that it shows only one site so far. Let's click on this and see if this changes. It still has one site. Let's look at manage. And here it shows that we are not authenticated to branch 2. So what we have to do is to authenticate ourselves to branch 2. I right click on that. I click on reconnect. And then it asks me to key in the credentials to connect to the platform services controller for branch 2. Remember, the platform services controller for branch 2 is at 220, which is the main vCenter at headquarters. So the vCenter server address is 221, which is the branch 2 vCenter, but it is in the same SSO domain as the 220 server. So that's where the platform services controller is shared, but the vCenter server address is that of branch 2. Keying in the credentials to the platform services controller, which is site.local, which is the headquarters SSO domain. And there we are. It has now connected to 220 also, or rather it was already connected to 20, now it is also connected to 221. So we have that, and we can go back to summary, and it now shows us the two target sites. So that's how one creates and connects target sites after the replication appliances have been set up. In this case, we created a closed loop. We went from our headquarters site to the linked mode server at branch 2 and created targets there. And then we also created targets between the two branches, branch 2 and branch 3 as well. And we saw how in some cases one had to enter credentials when you were not part of the same SSO domain. And in some cases where we were part of the same SSO domain, or the two source and targets were part of the same SSO domain, there was no need to enter credentials, which is exactly how SSO should work anyway. So I'm now connected to my VMware vCloud Air account. And the reason I'm here is because I want to show you the kind of information that you need to be able to connect your replication in your own premise, on-premise data center to a cloud-based disaster recovery environment. Now, I only have the subscription to the Virtual Private Cloud on demand. There is a subscription for disaster recovery in vCloud Air that can be obtained from VMware, and that specific information is needed. But I can give you a flavor for what kind of information is that would be needed. After this, we're going to go back into our vSphere client and take a look at how we would connect to a target that's out in the cloud. So I'm looking at one of my service IDs. Part of my private cloud on demand is in the US Virginia region or data center. That's part of vCloud Air. And I have two data centers there. In vCloud Air language or terminology, it's called virtual data centers, which is VDC. So just think of them as data centers with a certain resource pool that's available to you. So I created a packed pub disaster recovery site for replication. However, because I don't have the subscription for disaster recovery, it's not going to work exactly like it would. But what's important to show here is by clicking on this, you will be looking at the API endpoints for vCloud Director and, more importantly, an organization name. When you subscribe to a disaster recovery account, you will be given an endpoint or a URL by VMware to connect to for disaster recovery. You will also be given an organization name to connect to for disaster recovery. So just keeping that in mind, we're going to switch back to we'll go to our 220 data center, or rather 220 vCenter server, because that is our headquarters server, because more than likely we are going to replicate from there. So the target sites have already been set up to the branches, and now we click on this icon, which connects us to a cloud provider to configure replications. When I click on that, I need a cloud provider address, and the cloud provider address would look something like this. So I do a copy and I do a control V. Then an organization name, again the same thing. I go to vCloud Air, I copy this, and I come back to my client and I do a control V to paste it back in. Credentials would be the credentials that you are given for your disaster recovery account, and then there will be a password there as well. Now of course, this is an administration set of credentials, but if you want to use a different account for system monitoring, which would have lower level of privileges, then you would click on this and you would be able to do system monitoring with a lower level of privileges to the cloud rather than using administrative privileges, which is obviously a good thing. Now, of course, in this case, since I am not set up for disaster recovery, when I click next, do that and try next again, it's authenticating, and basically it's saying I cannot validate the user credentials and so on, because obviously these credentials are not correct. I will, just the heck of it, key in my real credentials for my account and see if the message changes anyway. We seem to have gotten a lot further. It actually logged us in, but it did not give us the name of a virtual data center that I could then utilize for disaster recovery. So while I was able to log on, I don't have the disaster recovery subscription. If you had one, then you would be able to specify the virtual data center, because that would actually show up here. And then the setting of targets would be exactly the same. You would just probably actually don't even need the credentials at that point in time, because you already have entered your credentials. And then everything would work in exactly the same way in terms of being able to replicate to the cloud and then recovering from the cloud as well, which we will see when we look at the section on recovery. So we've covered in extensive detail how to configure a target that's in the cloud and how to configure targets that are in our company enterprise environment. We've configured targets from our headquarters sites to branch sites and between branch sites as well. And we are going to proceed further with looking at how to actually configure replications. Since we have now created target sites, we are now in a position to create replication jobs, which is the subject of the next video. I look forward to seeing you there.